The massive alien ship appeared over Earth on a Tuesday morning. It was bigger than any city, floating silently above the Pacific Ocean. Hyun-woo watched it through the window of the United Nations building, his coffee growing cold in his hand. He had been a diplomat for 15 years, but nothing prepared him for this moment. The aliens called themselves the Varathians. They were tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. Their leader, Valaris, spoke through a translator device that hung in the air between them. She told the assembled human leaders that Earth had been watched for 6 months. The Galactic Council wanted to know what kind of species humans were before making contact. Hyun-woo listened carefully as Valaris explained. The council had seen humans building museums and concert halls. They watched people protest for peace and sign treaties to end wars. They saw children learning music and adults creating art. To the Varathians, humans looked civilized. They looked safe. 3 weeks later, Hyun-woo stood aboard the Varathian flagship with 2 other humans. Ji-won was a biologist who studied how different species lived together. She was small and quick, always writing notes in her tablet. Taeyang was their military advisor, though he wore a simple suit instead of a uniform. He smiled often and spoke softly, like a teacher more than a soldier. The ship was beautiful inside. Curved walls glowed with soft light. Plants grew in floating gardens. Music played somewhere in the distance, gentle and strange. The Varathians moved through their ship like dancers, never rushing, never loud. They offered the humans sweet drinks and soft chairs. Valaris showed them images of the Galactic Council. Hundreds of species lived together in peace, she explained. They traded goods and shared knowledge. They explored new worlds and built wonders together. Wars were rare, she said with pride. The Council had systems to solve problems with words instead of weapons. Hyun-woo asked the obvious question. Why now? Why contact Earth after all this time? Valaris tilted her head in what might have been a smile. Humans had finally stopped their large wars, she said. For the first time in recorded history, Earth had gone 5 years without a major conflict. The Council watched species for this sign. It meant humans were ready to join civilized society. Ji-won wrote furiously in her tablet. She asked about other species. Were they all peaceful too? Not all, Valaris admitted. Some species still fought among themselves. A few were quite aggressive. But the Council kept them far away in what they called the contested rim. Civilized species like humans would never need to go there. The galaxy was big enough for everyone to have space. Taeyang said very little. He watched everything with calm eyes. When Valaris showed them the Council's military forces, he asked quiet questions about ship designs and weapon systems. The Varathian explained that their peacekeeping fleet was small. They rarely needed it. Most problems were solved through talking. The tour lasted 3 days. They met other species. The Kelvorians looked like giant moths and spoke in musical tones. The Druk were rock-like beings who moved slowly and thought deeply. The Pixith were small and furry, always busy with some task or another. Every species they met was friendly and curious about humans. On the last day, the Council made their offer. Humanity could join as a junior member. They would receive territory in the safe zones far from any danger. They would get access to galactic technology and trade networks. In return, humans would follow Council laws and share their own knowledge and culture. Hyun-woo looked at Ji-won and Taeyang. They nodded. He turned to Valaris and accepted. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. Humans were not alone. The galaxy was full of life and it wanted to be friends. Celebrations erupted in every major city. People danced in the streets. Children drew pictures of aliens. Scientists wept with joy at the thought of new knowledge to discover. But not everyone celebrated. In a small office in Seoul, a marine biologist named Minji read the reports with worry. She studied predators in Earth's oceans, sharks and orcas and giant squid. She knew how predators behaved when they had no challenges. They became listless, depressed. Sometimes they stopped eating and died. Humans were predators too. Not like lions or tigers, but predators nonetheless. Human ancestors had hunted across continents, chasing prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. That instinct was still there, buried under cities and laws and civilization. Minji wondered what would happen to it in a galaxy where everything was safe and peaceful. She sent her concerns to the Council representatives, but no one paid attention. Everyone was too excited about the future. Hyun-woo moved to the Council's central station. It was a massive structure that held millions of beings from dozens of species. He got an apartment with a view of the stars and an office near the council chambers. Every day he attended meetings where species discussed trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Every day he spoke about human art and human history. He became good at making different species work together. G1 started her research immediately. She visited a dozen different worlds, studying how various species adapted to living together. She published papers that other scientists praised. She made friends across the galaxy. Her work showed that cooperation between species was not just possible but natural. Taeyang advised on security matters, but there was little to do. The Council's territory was peaceful. Pirates occasionally attacked isolated ships, but the peacekeeping forces handled them easily. Taeyang spent most of his time teaching Council guards about human tactics. They found his ideas interesting but impractical. Why would you need such aggressive strategies when everyone talked through their problems? 3 years passed quickly. Human colonies spread across the garden worlds the Council had assigned. Farmers grew crops in alien soil. Engineers built cities with both human and alien technology. Teachers helped human children learn alongside alien children. Traders carried Earth goods to distant markets and brought back wonders in return. Donghyun captained a freighter called Morning Calm. He was a practical man who loved space travel. His navigator Yuna knew 17 languages and had friends at every port. Together they built a successful trade route, carrying everything from Earth spices to Varathian crystals. Other species welcomed their ship because they were fair in business and friendly in person. Seokjin worked as an engineer on a new space station. He spent his days with Varathian technicians, learning their building methods while teaching them human solutions. They laughed at his jokes even when the translator made them confusing. The station grew slowly, a symbol of cooperation between species. Everything seemed perfect. Humans fit into galactic society like they had always belonged there. The Varathians congratulated themselves on finding such a civilized species. Other council members agreed. Humans were peaceful and intelligent. They would be wonderful additions to their peaceful galaxy. Only Minji kept worrying. She visited human colonies and talked to people. Some told her they felt strange, restless, like something was missing. They had everything they needed but felt empty inside. She started documenting cases, calling it predator depression. But when she presented her findings to the Council's medical experts, they dismissed her concerns. Humans were adjusting fine, they said. A little restlessness was normal. Minji hoped they were right. But deep in her gut, where old instincts lived, she felt something else. It felt like the calm before a storm, like the moment when prey realizes the predator has found its trail. She hoped that feeling was wrong. 3 years turned into a comfortable routine. Hyunwoo woke each morning in his apartment on the council station and prepared for another day of diplomatic work. He had learned to drink Varathian tea, which tasted like mint and starlight. His office walls displayed art from a dozen worlds, including a painting his daughter had made back on Earth. She was 12 now and attended a mixed school where human and alien children learned together. The council chambers had become familiar. Hyunwoo knew which representatives preferred morning meetings and which ones needed time to warm up to new ideas. He had helped settle disputes over mining rights and cultural misunderstandings. Once he had spent 2 weeks helping a Kelvorian colony and a Druk settlement agree on shared water resources. Both sides had thanked him afterwards with gifts. The Kelvorians gave him a singing crystal. The Druk carved his name in their sacred stone. Other species called him the Peacemaker. Valaris told him at a reception that humans had exceeded all expectations. They brought fresh ideas to old problems. They asked questions no one else thought to ask. They found compromises that satisfied everyone. Hyunwoo smiled and thanked her, but part of him wondered why other species found these skills so special. To him, it was just talking to people. Ji-won published her 4th research paper that year. This one discussed how human social structures compared to other species. She had discovered something interesting. Most intelligent species in the galaxy had evolved as either prey or herd animals. They valued consensus and safety. They avoided conflict naturally because their ancestors had survived by hiding or running. Humans were different. Human ancestors had been hunters, but they had also formed tight groups for protection. They could be both predator and pack. This made them uniquely suited for diplomacy, Ji-won argued. They understood both the need for safety and the drive to achieve goals. Her paper became required reading at the Council's Diplomatic Academy, But in her private notes, Jiwon wrote something else. She noticed that human behavior in council space was not quite normal. Humans smiled more than they did back on Earth. They agreed more easily. They avoided arguments that Earth humans would have engaged in. It was subtle, but it was there. Humans in the galaxy were performing civilization rather than living it. Taeyang noticed it too. He spent his days teaching council guards, but his students frustrated him. They were competent but lacked something he could not name. Urgency, perhaps, or hunger. When he taught them combat tactics, they learned the movements but not the purpose behind them. Fighting, to them, was a job, a skill like any other. They did not understand it as a necessity. He mentioned this once to a Varathian commander. She had looked at him with those strange, shimmering eyes and said that perhaps that was healthy. Maybe humans were too focused on conflict. Maybe that was why Earth had so many wars in its past. Taeyang had smiled and agreed, but he thought about her words for days afterward. Donghyun's freighter business thrived. Morning Calm was now one of 3 ships he owned. His original navigator, Yuna, had trained 2 more humans in her methods. They ran routes across a dozen systems carrying goods and passengers. Other captains respected Donghyun because he was reliable and fair. He never cheated, and he never backed out of an agreement. Yuna spent her free time documenting alien cultures. She had filled 17 journals with observations about how different species lived and thought. The Kelvorians valued beauty above all else. The Druk measured time in centuries rather than years. The Pixith could not understand the concept of personal property because they had evolved in hive colonies. Each species was fascinating in its own way, but Yuna noticed something that bothered her. None of them seemed to plan for danger. They built their homes beautiful but not defended. They traveled without weapons. They trusted that the council would protect them. It made sense, she supposed. They had lived in peace for generations. But it made her nervous in a way she could not explain. Seokjin's space station project was nearly complete. The structure hung in orbit around a purple gas giant, its arms spreading like a metal flower. It would serve as a hub for trade and research, a place where dozens of species could work together. Seokjin was proud of his work. The Varathian engineers had praised his innovative solutions to complex problems. But sometimes, late at night when the station was quiet, Seokjin walked the empty corridors and felt strange. The station was beautiful and functional, but it had no defenses. No reinforced sections in case of attack, no emergency weapons, no blast doors. When he suggested adding these features, the Varathian project leader had looked confused. Why would a research station need military features? This was not the contested rim. This was civilized space. Seokjin had agreed and moved on to other work. But he started adding small features anyway. Reinforced bulkheads that could be explained as structural support, sealed sections that he called storage, conduits that could carry power to weapon systems if weapon systems ever needed to be installed. He told no one about these additions. He did not even know why he was making them. Human colonies grew and prospered. On New Sol, a planet with 3 moons and purple grass, 15,000 humans built a city of glass and steel. They farmed alien soil and found it more fertile than Earth. They traded with nearby Kelvorian settlements and learned to appreciate their musical art. Children born there had never seen Earth, but they learned about it in school. But Minji noticed things when she visited the colonies. She was there to study local predators, but she spent more time studying humans. She found that people who had been soldiers on Earth were now working as teachers and counselors. Former combat pilots flew cargo ships. Marines who had trained for war now built houses. They were adapting to peaceful life, which should have been good, except they were not happy. Not exactly unhappy either, but something in between. They went through their days efficiently but without passion. They smiled, but their eyes were distant. When Minji interviewed them, they struggled to explain how they felt. One former soldier told her it was like being hungry but not knowing what food you needed. Another said it felt like living in a dream where everything was perfect, but nothing was real. A pilot told her she sometimes woke up gasping for air, even though the air was fine. Their bodies were healthy, but something in their minds was missing something. Minji expanded her research. She interviewed hundreds of humans across different colonies. She found the pattern everywhere, especially among people who had been in dangerous professions on Earth. They were experiencing what she called predator depression. Without challenges, without danger, without something to fight or overcome, part of their brains was shutting down. She presented her findings to the Council's Health Committee. They listened politely but dismissed her concerns. The Varathian medical officer explained that all species went through adjustment periods. Humans had lived with constant conflict for millennia. Of course, they felt strange in a peaceful environment. Give them time. A generation or two and humans would adapt completely. Minji wanted to argue but held her tongue. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was seeing problems where none existed. But her instincts, the same instincts that helped her track sharks through dark water, told her something different. They told her that predators without challenges did not adapt. They weakened, and weak predators either died or became dangerous. Back on Earth, the governments maintained small defensive forces. Officially, they were for asteroid defense and rescue operations. Unofficially, military leaders kept training and kept planning. They did not know what they were planning for, but they could not stop. It was like an itch they could not scratch. Admiral Quan Sun commanded Earth's defense fleet from a base on the moon. He had 17 ships under his command, more symbolic than practical. The Council's peacekeeping force was larger and more advanced. But Quan Sun kept his crews sharp. They ran drills every week. They practiced tactics that had no use in the peaceful galaxy. When Council observers questioned the extensive training, Quan Sun smiled and said humans like to stay busy. Yunwu visited Earth twice that year. Each time he was struck by how different it felt from Council space. Earth was louder, messier, more chaotic. People argued in the streets. Politicians debated aggressively. Sports fans screamed at games with real passion. It felt alive in a way that Council stations did not. His daughter asked him if he liked living with aliens more than living on Earth. Hyunwoo thought about the question carefully. He told her that Council space was beautiful and peaceful, but Earth felt like home in a way nowhere else did. She nodded like she understood, though she was too young to have visited the Council stations herself. On his last night of his second visit, Hyunwoo stood on the balcony of his old apartment and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there was the Council station, the Varathian ships, the peaceful galaxy that had welcomed humanity. It was everything his species had dreamed of. Peace, knowledge, friendship with alien species. So why did it feel like something was missing? He pushed the thought away and went to bed. Tomorrow he would return to space and continue his work. The galaxy was peaceful and humans were thriving. Everything was fine, everything was perfect, and that perhaps was the problem. The emergency signal came at 3 a.m, Council Standard Time. Hyunwoo was pulled from sleep by alarms he had never heard before. His communication device flashed red, the color reserved for the worst emergencies. He answered it with shaking hands. Valaris appeared on the screen. Her shimmering skin had gone pale and her voice trembled. The outer territories were under attack. 3 colonies had gone silent. 2 Council peacekeeping ships had been destroyed. Something terrible had emerged from dark space. They called themselves the Ravagers. Hyunwoo dressed quickly and rushed to the Council chambers. They were packed with representatives from every species, all talking at once. The main screen showed scattered data from the attack zones, destroyed stations, silent colonies, debris fields where ships had been, and sensor readings of the enemy fleet, massive beyond anything the Council had encountered. The Ravagers were not interested in talking. They broadcast no demands. They sent no warnings. They simply appeared and began destroying everything in their path. Initial reports said they were large, heavily armored, and utterly merciless. Their ships moved in perfect formations, crushing Council forces like insects. A Kelvorian representative was crying, her musical voice broken with grief. Her species had a colony in the attack zone, 10 million people, all gone in less than an hour. The Druk representative sat silent, his rock-like face showing no emotion, but his hands were clenched so tight that cracks appeared in his stone fingers. Valaris called for order and got silence instead. Everyone waited for her to speak. She explained what little they knew. The Ravagers were a nomadic species that appeared every few centuries. They conquered, they enslaved, they destroyed, and then they vanished into deep space. 17 civilizations had fallen to them over the millennia. The Council had hoped they were gone forever. They were wrong. The Council's military commander, a tall Varathian named Telkis, presented their defense plan. The peacekeeping fleet would fall back to defensive positions around core worlds. They would evacuate the outer territories and the contested rim. They could not win a direct fight, so they would not fight. They would retreat and hope the Ravagers would take what they wanted and leave. Hyunwoo stood up. His voice was calm but hard. What about the colonies in the outer territories? What about the billions of people who lived there? Telkis looked at him with sad eyes. They could not save everyone. Resources were limited. They had to protect the most important worlds first. It was the only logical choice. Logical, perhaps, but it meant writing off entire planets, leaving them to the Ravagers. Hyunwoo looked around the chamber and saw the same acceptance on most faces. This was how prey animals survived. They sacrificed the weak to save the herd. They ran and hoped the predator would not follow. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Every plan presented was a variation of retreat. Fall back, evacuate, minimize losses. Build defenses around core worlds. Hope for the best. When Hyunwoo suggested fighting back, other representatives looked at him like he was mad. Fight the Ravagers? With what? The Council's peacekeeping force was designed for minor disputes, not war. Over the next week, the situation worsened. The Ravagers pushed deeper into Council territory. More colonies fell silent. Refugee ships fled toward the core worlds, carrying survivors and horror stories. The few Council ships that engaged the enemy were destroyed within minutes. The Ravagers had technology decades ahead of anything the Council possessed. Panic spread through civilized space. Species began evacuating their outer colonies without waiting for Council authorization. Trade routes collapsed as freighter captains refused to travel near the danger zones. The economy that had functioned smoothly for centuries started breaking down. Donghyun's freighter Morning Calm was 3 days from the contested rim when he received word about the attacks. He changed course immediately, moving toward the danger instead of away from it. Yuna questioned the decision but did not argue. She knew that look in Donghyun's eyes. She had seen it before, back on Earth, in people who ran toward emergencies instead of away from them. They found a colony that had been hit 2 days earlier. New Haven was a human settlement, small but growing. 5,000 people had lived there. Now it was ruins. Buildings were shattered. The landing pad was scorched metal. Bodies lay in the streets, frozen in the cold vacuum where the habitat domes had been breached. Donghyun and his crew searched for survivors and found none. Everyone was dead. Men, women, children, all killed without mercy. The Ravagers had taken nothing. They had simply destroyed everything and moved on. Yuna recorded everything with shaking hands. She had documented dozens of cultures, but she had never documented death on this scale. Donghyun stood in the ruined colony center and felt something change inside him. It was like a switch flipping, like a door opening to a room he had kept locked. He contacted other human ships in the sector. Within a day, 7 freighters diverted to his position. No one had ordered them to come. No authority had called for help. They simply came because Donghyun had sent out a message that said humans were gathering. That was enough. Minji was on a research station when the attacks began. She was not surprised by the Ravagers. In a galaxy this large, predator species had to exist. What surprised her was the Council's response. They were running. All of them. Every species except humans. She started monitoring human behavior across the colonies and stations. What she found confirmed her worst fears and her deepest suspicions. Human stress hormones were spiking, but not in the way that indicated panic. Adrenaline production was up. Cortisol patterns matched ancient Earth data from times of tribal warfare. But humans were not becoming irrational. They were becoming focused. The predator depression she had documented was vanishing. Those listless former soldiers were suddenly alert and purposeful. Pilots who had been flying cargo were requesting combat certification. Engineers were redesigning systems without being asked. Across all human settlements, people were preparing for something they could not yet name. Minji realized what was happening. Humanity had spent 3 years in a peaceful galaxy, trying to fit in, trying to be civilized. They had suppressed their instincts because the Council did not need those instincts. But now something had challenged them. Something had killed their people. And the old programming was activating. She sent her findings to every human authority she could reach. The Council's medical committee dismissed her reports. But human leaders read them carefully. Tai Yang attended an emergency meeting of Council military advisors. Telkis presented updated retreat plans. They were abandoning 3 more sectors, including the contested rim, where 2 human colonies were located. Taeyang asked if they were going to evacuate those colonies first. Telkis hesitated. There was not enough time or ships. The Ravagers were moving too fast. Those colonies would have to fend for themselves. He was sorry, but it was the only choice. Taeyang stood up slowly. He thanked Telkis for his honesty and left the meeting. As he walked through the council station corridors, he made several calls. By the time he reached his quarters, Admiral Quan Sun was already mobilizing Earth's defense fleet. The 17 symbolic ships were powering up their engines. Ji-Wan watched all of this from her research lab. She had been studying cooperative behavior between species. Now she was seeing a different kind of behavior emerge. Humans across the galaxy were self-organizing without central command. They were responding to a threat the way social predators had responded for millions of years. The pack was gathering, she wrote in her journal that night. The council thought they had integrated a civilized species. They had not. They had accepted a predator species that chose to be civilized. There was a difference. A crucial difference that the council was about to learn. Yunwu called another meeting with Valeris. He made a simple request. Give humans access to military manufacturing specifications. Let them build defensive weapons. Let them help protect council space. Valeris refused gently but firmly. Humans were too new to the council. They had no experience with this level of conflict. Military technology in untested hands could be dangerous. The council would handle the situation their way. Hyunwoo looked at the Varathian leader. She had been kind to humanity. She had welcomed them with open arms. But she did not understand them at all. He spoke carefully, choosing each word. If the council would not give humans weapons, then humans would use their own. Earth had never fully disarmed. Human colonies had defensive systems. Human ships had hidden weapons. It was not that humans did not trust the council. It was that humans knew something the council had forgotten. Predators never retire. Valeris stared at him in confusion. What was he saying? Were humans threatening to break council laws? No, Hyunwoo said quietly. Humans were going to protect what was theirs, with or without permission. He hoped it would be with permission, but it would happen either way. The meeting ended badly. Valeris reported to the full council that humans were becoming problematic. Several representatives suggested removing human membership until the crisis passed. But before any vote could be taken, word reached the council chambers. Earth's defense fleet was departing for the contested rim. Every human freighter in the sector was converging on threatened colonies. Human. The transformation happened faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of the council's decision to abandon the rim territories, humanity changed. On Earth, Admiral Quan Sun stood in the Moon-Base Command Center and watched his tactical display fill with green icons. His 17 ships had become 53. Retired military vessels were coming out of storage. Private ships were volunteering. Even some of the new exploration vessels were being retrofitted. And from the planet below, the old shipyards in Korea, Brazil, and Russia were lighting up for the first time in years. The governments had not ordered this mobilization. No president or prime minister had made a speech calling for war. It simply happened. Ship captains called their old crews. Engineers reported to work without being asked. Factories that had been making peaceful goods started producing other things with harder edges. Quan Sun received reports from across the system. Every human colony was doing the same thing. New Seoul was converting its agricultural platforms into supply depots. The mining colony on Titan was rushing out refined metals. The research station near Jupiter was suddenly producing communications equipment at 3 times normal capacity. It was like watching a sleeping giant wake up and remember what it was. Taeyang took command of the defense fleet without ceremony. One day he was a military advisor. The next day he was a fleet commander with 53 ships under his authority. Admiral Quan Sun had simply sent him a message that said the fleet was his to lead. No debate, no argument. The hierarchy had reasserted itself naturally. The other humans on the council station noticed the change in Taeyang immediately. The soft-spoken advisor was gone. In his place was someone harder, sharper, more focused. His eyes, which had always been kind, now carried something ancient and cold. He moved differently, spoke differently, even stood differently. When he walked through the council station corridors, other species instinctively moved aside. They did not understand why. They just knew that the space around Taiyang felt dangerous now. Ji-Wan documented all of it. She recorded human conversations and body language. She measured hormone levels in volunteers. She tracked behavioral changes across demographics. What she found was both fascinating and terrifying. Humans were not becoming violent or irrational. They were becoming focused with a clarity that other species could not match. Their cooperation was increasing, but in a different way than Council species cooperated. Council cooperation was based on agreement and consensus. Human cooperation was based on shared purpose. They did not need to agree on everything. They just needed to agree on the target. She called it pack convergence. When social predators faced a threat, they aligned instantly. Millions of years of evolution had taught them that survival meant unity against danger. Individual differences did not matter when something threatened the pack. Seokjin's space station project stopped being a research facility. His Varathian colleagues watched in confusion as he began modifying their careful designs. He installed power systems in places that made no sense. He reinforced sections that did not need reinforcing. He added sealed compartments that served no apparent purpose. When the Varathian project leader asked what he was doing, Seokjin explained calmly. He was preparing the station for possible attack. The leader protested. This was a research station in protected space. There would be no attack. Seokjin agreed politely and continued his modifications. 3 days later, weapons arrived on unmarked ships. The sealed compartments became armories. The extra power systems fed shield generators. The reinforced sections became defensive strongpoints. The research station had become a fortress, and it had happened so smoothly that no one could point to when the change occurred. The Varathian project leader filed a complaint with the council. Seokjin was violating construction agreements. He was turning a peaceful installation into a military base. Something had to be done. By the time the complaint reached anyone with authority, 17 other human installations had undergone similar transformations. Cargo depots now had point defense systems. Communication satellites carried electronic warfare packages. Even the simple farming colonies on garden worlds had suddenly developed sophisticated sensor networks. Yuna made a discovery that changed everything. She was cataloging council emergency procedures when she found classified files about the Ravagers, previous encounters, tactical data, psychological profiles. The information was restricted to council military command, but human intelligence officers had accessed it within hours of the first attack. She brought the data to Dong Hyun. Together they studied it through the night. The Ravagers were not just strong and violent. They were hierarchical and ritualistic. They operated in precise formations. They valued direct confrontation. They attacked with overwhelming force because they believed force was the only thing that mattered. Dong Hyun smiled for the first time in days. The Ravagers were predators, yes, but they were not pack hunters. They were territory holders, big and strong and confident. The kind of predator that had never learned to fear the small ones that hunted in groups. He sent his findings to Taiyang, who sent them to every human ship in the fleet. Within hours, new tactics were being developed, not to meet the Ravagers head-on, but to hunt them properly. Minji's research station became an informal headquarters for human biological warfare. Not disease or poison, but something the Council had never considered. Psychological warfare designed specifically for the Ravager mind. She worked with teams across human space, analyzing every scrap of data about Ravager behavior. They were pack animals in their own way, but their pack was rigid. Challenge the hierarchy and the whole structure could crack. Show weakness and they would attack. Show strength in unexpected places and they would pause to reassess. Minji designed broadcasts, sounds and images that would unsettle the Ravager psyche. The Council thought it was pointless. Yelling at your enemy did not defeat them. But humans understood something deeper. Sometimes the battle was won before the first shot was fired. Yunwoo found himself in an impossible position. He was still the human ambassador to the Council, but his species was preparing for war without Council approval. Valaris called him to her office every day. Each time she asked the same questions. What were humans doing? Why were they militarizing? Did they not understand that the Council would handle the situation? Each time Hyunwoo gave the same answer. Humans were protecting themselves. They were not rebelling against the Council. They were not starting a war. They were simply refusing to die quietly, but Valaris did not understand. The Council's way was clear. Retreat and protect what could be protected. Accept losses to preserve the greater whole. That was how civilized species survived. Hyunwoo tried to explain. Humans had a different approach. They had evolved as persistence hunters. Predators that never gave up, never accepted defeat, never left their pack behind. It was not about being brave or foolish. It was about what they were at the deepest level. Valaris looked at him with those shimmering eyes, and for the first time, Hyunwoo saw fear there. Not fear of the Ravagers, fear of humans. She was beginning to understand what had joined the Council 3 years ago. The final confrontation came at an emergency council session. Telkis presented new retreat orders. 4 more sectors would be abandoned, including 2 with human colonies. The evacuation timetable gave 36 hours for millions of people to escape. Taeyang stood and spoke for the first time in council chambers. His voice was quiet, but it carried. The council could retreat if they wanted. The council could abandon sectors and write off populations. That was their choice. But humans would not retreat. Humans would fight. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted about council law and proper procedure. How dare humans act unilaterally? How dare they risk council security with unsanctioned military action? Taeyang waited for silence. When he spoke again, his words were simple. Humans had tried the council way. They had tried civilization and peace and talking. It was good. It was beautiful. Humans had genuinely enjoyed it, but something had come that did not want to talk. Something had killed human colonies, and when that happened, civilization became a tool, not a cage. He told them about human history, about wars that lasted decades, about enemies that seemed unbeatable until they were beaten, about a species that had fought itself for thousands of years and somehow survived. Other species ran from predators. Humans became the predator. The council could join them or stand aside, but humans were going to the rim. They were going to find the Ravagers, and they were going to make them regret ever discovering council space. The chamber was silent. Valaris looked around at her fellow council members. The Kelvorians were trembling. The Druk were thoughtful. The Pixith were hiding, and Kethryn, the Scalix observer, was nodding slowly. She made her decision. The council would not authorize human military action, but they would not stop it either. Let humans go to the rim. Let them face the Ravagers. If they succeeded, wonderful. If they failed, the council would mourn them and continue its retreat. Hyunwoo stood beside Taeyang as they left the chambers. He asked his friend if he really thought humanity could win. Taeyang looked at him and smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the human fleet gathered at the edge of council space. 87 ships of various sizes and purposes, none of them purpose-built warships. Freighters with hastily mounted weapons, colony transports converted to troop carriers, mining vessels that now carried missiles instead of cargo. And at the center, Admiral Kwan Sun's 17 military ships that had been considered obsolete by council standards. Taeyang stood on the bridge of the flagship Determination and looked at his fleet. It was not impressive by galactic standards. The council's peacekeeping force had been larger and more advanced, and the Ravagers had crushed them. But Taeyang was not worried. The council had tried to fight like prey animals defending territory. Humans would hunt like predators chasing food. The first strike came 3 days into Ravager-controlled space. Donghyun led 6 freighters in a lightning raid on a Ravager supply depot. They appeared from behind a moon, fired everything they had, and vanished before the enemy could respond. The depot was destroyed. 3 Ravager ships gave chase. That was the plan. The Ravagers followed the human ships through an asteroid belt. They were faster and more powerful. They would catch the humans easily. Except the humans had seeded the belt with mines. Not fancy council mines, but simple human designs. Crude but effective. 2 Ravager ships were destroyed. The third was damaged and retreated. Yuna analyzed the enemy response from the data they gathered. The Ravagers had pursued immediately without scouting. They had not expected a trap. Why would prey set traps? This was useful information. Over the next week, human ships hit 7 more targets. Supply lines, communication relays, small patrol groups. Each time they struck hard and vanished. Each time the Ravagers responded with overwhelming force, arriving to find nothing but empty space and debris. The Ravagers were confused. This was not how battles were supposed to work. You met your enemy. You showed your strength. You crushed them. But the humans would not stand and fight. They just kept appearing, attacking, and disappearing. Taeyang watched the pattern develop from his command center. The Ravagers were strong but predictable. They operated like a hammer, searching for nails to hit. But humans were not nails. Humans were wasps, stinging and flying away, always moving, always attacking, never giving the enemy a chance to use their superior strength. Seokjin's modified space station became a forward base. His defensive weapons drove off 3 Ravager scouting missions. The station did not look threatening. It looked like a research installation. But when Ravager ships approached, they were met with weapons fire that should not have been there. They retreated to report this anomaly. And while they did, human ships used the station to resupply and repair. Minji's psychological warfare began to take effect. Human ships broadcast strange signals into Ravager communication channels. Not threats or demands. Something worse, laughter, human laughter, and sounds of pursuit. Footsteps. Breathing. The sounds of something chasing prey. The council observers monitoring human activity were horrified. What were humans doing? You did not taunt your enemy. You did not play mind games during war. That was not how civilized species fought. But the Ravagers were listening. Their communications showed confusion. Some of their ships reported hearing things that were not there. Others became more aggressive, attacking empty space where they thought humans were hiding. Their perfect formation started to break down. G1 studied the data from her lab ship and marveled at what was happening. Humans were not fighting a conventional war. They were using every tool evolution had given them. Endurance, creativity, pack coordination, psychological manipulation. They were not trying to be stronger than the Ravagers. They were trying to be more persistent. The major engagement came in the 3rd week. The Ravagers gathered their fleet at Broken Rim, a strategic point that controlled access to 3 sectors. 200 massive warships bristling with weapons. They sent a challenge broadcast. Come and face us, they demanded. Stop hiding and fight. Taeyang smiled when he heard it. The Ravagers still did not understand. Humans did not need to accept challenges. Humans decided when and where to fight. He gave the orders for the persistence hunt to begin. The human fleet did not attack Broken Rim directly. Instead, small groups of ships began hitting the Ravagers from every direction. 3 ships would attack, fire everything, and retreat. Before the Ravagers could respond, 5 more ships would attack from a different angle. Then 4 more, then 6. The attacks were not meant to destroy the enemy fleet. They were meant to exhaust it. The Ravagers responded to every attack with full force. They launched fighters. They maneuvered their massive ships. They fired weapons that could destroy planets, but they hit nothing but empty space. The humans were already gone, already planning the next strike. This continued for 6 days. 72 hours of constant attacks from rotating human ships. Every time a human vessel exhausted its weapons and fuel, it retreated to resupply while fresh ships took its place. The humans fought in shifts. The Ravagers did not. Dong Hyun led attack after attack, his freighter Morning Calm somehow surviving what should have been suicide runs. Yuna calculated jump points and exit strategies, finding paths through space that let them escape impossible situations. They slept in shifts. They ate while flying. They became efficient at violence in a way that terrified them and exhilarated them at the same time. Other human ships did the same. Captains who had been hauling cargo now flew attack patterns. Engineers who had been building stations now built weapons mid-battle. Scientists calculated optimal targeting solutions. Everyone contributed because everyone was part of the hunt. On the ground, Seokjin's station provided repair and resupply services at a pace that should have been impossible. His crews worked without rest, fixing ships and sending them back out in hours instead of days. They were exhausted but focused. This was what humans had evolved to do. This was persistence. The Ravager fleet at Broken Rim began to deteriorate. Not from damage, though they had taken losses. From exhaustion, their crews had been at battle stations for 6 days straight. Their systems needed maintenance. Their ammunition was running low. And still the humans kept coming, like an endless swarm of insects that could not be swatted away. On the 7th day, Taeyang launched the final assault. Every human ship that could still fly converged on Broken Rim, but they did not attack in a grand charge. They continued the harassment, but now with greater intensity. More ships, more attacks, more pressure. The Ravagers tried to hold formation, tried to maintain discipline, but their crews were beyond exhausted. Their systems were failing. Their ammunition was nearly gone. When human ships appeared on sensors, Ravager crews took seconds longer to respond, then minutes, then some did not respond at all. The first Ravager ship to break formation retreated toward dark space. Then another, then 10. The perfect fleet coordination that had destroyed Council peacekeepers fractured under the weight of exhaustion. The hammer had been worn down by the wasps. Taeyang gave the order. All human ships opened fire at once, not on the fleet center where the Ravagers were strongest, on the edges where discipline had broken. The attacks drove more ships out of formation. The Ravagers tried to regroup but could not. They had not slept, had not rested, had not been prepared for an enemy that would never stop coming. The Ravager commander made the calculation that his species had never made before. Retreat or die, he chose retreat. The massive fleet, which had crushed 17 civilizations, turned and fled into dark space. Those ships too damaged to jump were abandoned. Their crews surrendered or died. Humanity had won. Not through superior strength, not through better technology, through persistence, through refusing to quit, through being exactly what evolution had made them. The Council could not believe the reports. The Ravagers, the terror of the galaxy, had been defeated by a species that had joined the Council 3 years ago. By ships that were not even military vessels. By tactics that made no sense to prey species. Hyunwoo returned to the Council chambers a month later. He looked older, tired, but his eyes held something new. Confidence, perhaps. Or certainty. He stood before the assembled representatives and waited for them to speak first. Valaris broke the silence. She asked how humans had done what seemed impossible. How had they beaten an enemy the Council could not face? Hyunwoo chose his words carefully. Humans had not beaten the Ravagers through strength. They had beaten them through endurance. The Ravagers were built for overwhelming force. Humans were built for long pursuits. It was not about winning individual battles. It was about never letting the prey rest. Catherine, the Scalix observer, stood and proposed formal reclassification. Humans were not civilized prey species. They were apex persistence predators who happened to build museums and write poetry. The difference was crucial. The galaxy needed to understand what had joined the Council. The chamber debated for hours. Some species were grateful for human intervention. Others were frightened. All of them were confused. How could a species be both civilized and dangerous? Jiwon presented her research to the Council's Science Committee. She explained human evolution, the long hunts across African plains, the ability to track prey for days without stopping, the social structures that